Gentlemen, thank you for coming for this very special event. And you know as well as I do, our currency has been debased and is continuing to be debased. Our federal government is trampling on the rights of the states. More importantly, is trampling on the rights of the citizens. And that is where the line has to be drawn. Ladies and gentlemen, for over 2 decades throughout his life, Dr. Ron Paul has served us in Congress, not being a representative of the government to us, but being our representative to the government. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the next President of the United States, Dr. Ron Paul.
Thank you, and thank you for coming out. I understand you have a little bit of a water problem around here. Texas, I'm living in an area where there's a drought. We live next to the coast, so we're working on fair and balanced water supplies. But it is a delight to be here, and obviously I'm in Iowa for a very special reason. I hear there's a campaign going on. It's a good state to campaign in, and a good time to emphasize August 13th because it's a preliminary and important straw vote. So we will be there, and if at all possible, if you're interested and excited about what we're doing, I hope we can get you to attend and bring somebody with you. But it is a very important time for us as a country on what's happening. I've been involved in politics really since the 70s, although I became fascinated with the trends and the direction of the country actually in the 60s. I was in medical school at that time. But I began reading Austrian free market economics, emphasizing sound money and free markets and private property rights and minimal government. And there was a prediction made in the 1960s that our monetary system wouldn't work because it was devised after World War II. We became the issuer of the reserve currency. The dollar would be the reserve currency, and the dollar would be backed by gold. And it was predicted even then by free market economists that it wouldn't work because there weren't enough people in America weren't allowed to own gold. It wasn't a redeemable currency, and it would be abused and it would break down. So I read that in the 60s, and lo and behold, they're absolutely right. In 1971, it broke down. There's a lot of chaos, inflation, and what's happened since there has been a tremendous growth of government because there are no restraints on government spending. Because if you come up short, you can't tax people, you can't borrow, you just print up the money. It's pretty amazing that it's lasted this long, because the history of money shows that all paper money fails, and that only gold money lasts. And it's lasted for thousands of years. So the problems were predictable, the bubbles were blown up, the predictable consequence of the collapse of the bubble would occur. And although the bubble essentially started in an earnest way in 1971, there have been corrections, and a little air was let out, and there'd be a sort of a recession and recovery. But it eventually got to the point where the bubble was so big that it was a bursting of the bubble. The bubble started to leak in the year 2000. And the economy has been very weak since the year 2000 if you look at the whole country as a whole. And the standard of living has gone down, real employment has gone down. There are no significant additional good jobs in the last 10 years, and yet we've had 30 million new people in our country. That's why people aren't feeling good about the economy, and why the economy is going to be the major issue next year as well as right now. So the NASDAQ bubble was a pretty strong warning sign in the year 2000, and now with the housing bubble bursting in 07, 08, now we are living in another era where all they could offer us is more inflation. Inflation of money. Print more money, spend more money, run up more debt, borrow more money, regulate more, and it's supposed to solve the problems that were caused by those very things. And they're wondering, why are things not getting better? 3 years now spending trillions and trillions of dollars. Well, the trillions and trillions of dollars went into the hands of the people who caused the trouble. I mean, our government, and put the burden on the taxpayer of bailing out all the people who were ripping us off and benefiting from all these government programs. And the people who are getting stuck with the bad assets, the Fed as well as Treasury and the Congress bailed out the people and bought the bad assets, and instead of holding gold in the bank backing up our currencies, they hold mortgage assets, the derivatives, the worthless assets, and they call that wealth, and it isn't. And are starting to recognize it. People are saying, oh, I mean, the economy is not yet recovered. Oh, everybody knows the economy hasn't really recovered. Will there be a double dip? Well, for the people who lost their jobs and still having trouble, it's not a double dip, it's this. So something has to be done, and it's not that complex. The economists who predicted it would come, if they would listen to those economists, we could solve the problems, because they were right about the bubble being built, and they know about what to do. And that means we'd have to change policies. But the reason it doesn't happen is a lot of people don't understand it. A lot of people don't believe it would work. And there is a political problem with what you're supposed to do, because you're supposed to do a lot less. You're not supposed to bail out people and say, oh, you know, if we don't bail out the banks, it'll be the end of our country. Like right now, they're saying, if you don't raise the debt limit, it's the end of the Western civilization, you know, as we know it. And so people get frightened, the politicians get frightened, just like when the bailouts came in '08. Both our candidates that were running for that election, both of them rushed back to D.C. and both voted for the TARP bailouts. So that's how well ingrained the system has been and was even 4 years ago. I think it's changed. I think since we've seen the Tea Party movement and the people speaking out and the progress we've made in emphasizing the Federal Reserve, and now that we are getting the Federal Reserve looked at, tremendous changes. And yet, if the government quits bailing out, people, there would be a tough time. If we would have done it at the beginning, it would have been a bad year, and it would have been over, and we'd all be back to work again. So we have a lot to do. I think the most important thing is to realize how important the monetary system is and do something to curtail this power of the Federal Reserve System. I think that is one of the most important things that we do. When we try to solve all our problems, we have to look at economic problems. And first, what we need to do is try to replace the Federal Reserve. They print the money and they call that wealth. It isn't. We have to stop that, because all that does is dilute wealth. But where would the wealth come from? We need to repatriate a lot of the wealth that's been parked overseas. But businesses don't want to bring it home because they're going to be taxed. They can start a business overseas with a lot less regulation, a lot less taxes, and they can do it quicker and more efficiently. So we'd have to change the tax code, not tax people when they bring their money at home, not tax people, not tax the corporations and punish them, because when you tax the corporations, just a sales tax, they have to pass it on. So the whole system would have to change to where we would believe and understand why free markets work. We've been not using free markets, and we've had this currency that causes a weak currency, and that causes capital to leave. And that's why people went, even to of all places, our business people think it's better to go build a plant in China than it is in this country. So you know we have very serious problems. So the economic issue, it will be the very big issue. The other area that I've talked about a whole lot that is related to economics, but it also has to do with how we're wasting money overseas. I don't see how we can get control of our budget if we think we're going to cut health care. I think all our programs are overwhelmed. I think our government's doing way too much. I'd be willing to cut a little bit of everything and get things down. But I think it's more important to think about how much goes overseas. We're spending now over $1 trillion to maintain our empire. We're in 130 countries, 900 bases. We're building huge embassies around the world. And we're allowing our presidents to fight wars without even talking to the Congress. That is one thing that I have pledged. I would never go to war and have an all-out war without getting, permission from the Congress. It shouldn't be that way. The president has the authority to repel attacks, but not to go to war as being done today in Libya. We're at war in Libya, and the president says, we don't have to tell the Congress. It's not a real war because they're not shooting back.
Ridiculous.
I mean, that is literally the excuse that has been given. That if they're so weak and we can take over a country, if they can't shoot back, it's not a real world war. But most people don't realize how many places we're in. Most people know we're still in Libya, and